The name Richard Wallace was known across every business magazine in America. To some, he was a genius, the man who turned bankrupt plots of land into billion-dollar skyscrapers. To others, he was a ruthless predator, buying out small companies and entire neighborhoods without a second thought. Whenever Richard appeared in public, it was always the same image: a tall man in an immaculate three-piece suit, his silver hair slicked back, his watch gleaming under the lights of Wall Street. He never smiled for the cameras. He didn't need to. The world already knew he had everything. But behind that polished exterior was a man wrapped in layers of distance. Richard had built walls higher than his buildings, walls that kept out not just competitors but also kindness, vulnerability, and compassion. To him, emotions were liabilities. Attachments were distractions. Success was measured in profit margins, not in people's lives. That's why no one was surprised when he became the subject of viral criticism. Social media called him America's coldest billionaire. Stories spread of tenants displaced when Richard's company redeveloped their blocks into luxury condos. His name alone could ignite furious debates online. And yet, Richard never responded. He never explained, never justified. He didn't care. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Richard's mornings began in the same mechanical rhythm. Wake up in his penthouse overlooking Central Park. Drink his single espresso. Read 3 newspapers while his chauffeur prepared the car. Meetings, deals, lunches with other powerful men. Afternoons spent in glass boardrooms high above the city, where the rest of the world looked like a toy model beneath his feet. It was a lonely existence, though Richard would never admit it. He had no wife, no children, no family photos on his desk. His assistants came and went, always replaced by someone younger, sharper, hungrier. But none of them lasted long. They all eventually realized something. Richard Wallace was a man impossible to know. One late autumn afternoon, as he left a high-profile charity gala, an event he attended only because his PR team insisted, Richard stood by his car, scrolling through messages on his phone. The gala had raised millions for cancer research, but Richard had sat through it like a ghost, applauding politely, his mind already drifting to the next merger. As his driver opened the car door, Richard caught sight of a cluster of journalists on the other side of the street. They weren't pointing their cameras at him, though. Instead, they were focused on a group of children from a nearby shelter who had come to perform a song for the donors. Their voices, fragile yet hopeful, carried across the evening air. Richard paused for only a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping into the leather interior of his car. He ordered the driver to take him home, shutting the door on the music, on the children, on the entire world. That was Richard Wallace. The man who could build empires, but refused to look into the eyes of a child. And yet, cracks were already beginning to form in the armor he had so carefully constructed. For weeks, headlines had started to shift. Rumors circulated that Richard's empire was under investigation for questionable land deals. A younger generation of billionaires, with softer edges and social media charisma, were capturing the public's admiration. Richard, once seen as untouchable, was now being called outdated, heartless, even dangerous. He ignored the noise, of course. But deep down there was something gnawing at him. A faint echo of a childhood he had buried long ago. Memories of nights when he had gone to bed hungry. Of shoes with holes. Of watching his own mother struggle to keep a roof over their heads. Richard had promised himself he would never feel that kind of vulnerability again. That's why he fought so hard, why he closed himself off. Kindness had no place in survival. Still, fate has a way of testing even the most unshakable beliefs. Because soon, in a moment he could never have predicted, Richard Wallace's carefully constructed world was about to collide with someone who would change it forever. Not a CEO. Not a politician. Not another billionaire. But a boy. A boy with nothing but courage in his pocket. And a dream that would pierce through the armor of America's coldest billionaire. While Richard Wallace spent his evenings overlooking the glittering skyline of Manhattan, just a few miles away in a forgotten corner of the Bronx, life looked very different. There, 12-year-old Jaden Brooks was learning what survival really meant. Jaden lived in a crumbling shelter with his 8-year-old sister, Amara. Their mother had passed away the year before, after a long battle with pneumonia that went untreated too long because she couldn't afford proper health care. Their father was gone long before that, leaving only faded memories and an empty chair at the dinner table. Now it was just the two of them, Jaden and Amara, against the world. The shelter was crowded, noisy, and always carried the faint smell of damp walls and stale bread. Rows of metal bunk beds filled the rooms, and privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Jaden hated the way Amara sometimes cried softly at night, trying to hide her tears under the thin blanket. He hated that he couldn't always make her feel safe. But what Jaden lacked in resources he made up for with determination. Every morning before school he helped the shelter staff sweep floors or carry boxes in exchange for an extra carton of milk for Amara. After school, while his classmates rushed home to their parents, Jaden ran errands for shopkeepers, mowed lawns, or sold bottled water on street corners. Every dollar he earned went into a small jar hidden under his mattress. It wasn't much, just a few crumpled bills and coins, but to Jaden it was a symbol. A promise that one day he and Amara would live in a real home again. At school, Jaden was quiet, but his teachers noticed something about him. He had a spark, a sharp mind, a natural leadership that drew others to him. In history class, when they studied the lives of great leaders, Jaden's hand always shot up first. "People listen to leaders," he once told his teacher. "If I can be that one day, maybe people will listen to kids like us too." His dream wasn't fame or money or power. It was something much simpler. Stability. A place where Amara could paint without worrying about where the next meal would come from. A place where he didn't have to be both brother and father at 12 years old. Still, the world wasn't gentle with boys like Jaden. One evening, after finishing a shift helping a local mechanic, Jaden walked Amara back to the shelter. The streets were wet from a sudden downpour, neon lights flickering in puddles. Amara skipped beside him, holding his hand, her small backpack bouncing with each step. "Jay, when we get a house, can I paint my room purple?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Jaden smiled, though his chest tightened. "Of course. Purple walls, purple curtains, even purple stars on the ceiling if you want." Her laughter echoed down the street. For a moment, it almost drowned out the reality of where they were heading. A shelter that would lock its doors at 9 p.m., leaving anyone laid out on the streets. That night, as Amara slept, Jaden sat by the window, staring out at the city. In the distance, the skyscrapers glowed like beacons of another universe. A universe where people like Richard Wallace lived. A universe where dinner meant fine restaurants instead of canned soup, where home was penthouses instead of bunk beds. Jaden clenched his fists, not out of envy but out of determination. "I'll get us out of here," he whispered to himself. "I don't care how long it takes. I'll find a way." But fate often arrives when least expected. The very next week, a storm swept through the city. The shelter roof leaked so badly that water pooled on the floor. Volunteers scrambled with buckets, towels, anything to keep the children dry. Jaden worked tirelessly alongside them, trying to protect Amara and the other kids. And then came the moment that would change everything. As the storm raged outside, a stray dog, skinny, soaked, trembling, darted across the flooded street. Amara gasped, clutching Jaden's arm. The dog slipped, nearly struck by a passing car. Without hesitation, Jaden bolted into the street. His sneakers splashed through the water as he raced toward the frightened animal. Horns blared, tires screeched, but Jaden didn't slow down. He scooped the dog into his arms just as a black luxury sedan skidded to a halt inches away. Inside that car sat Richard Wallace. For one fleeting second, the eyes of America's coldest billionaire met the eyes of a boy who had nothing but courage. Two worlds, one of limitless wealth, the other of desperate survival, collided in the glow of rain-slicked streets. Richard's jaw tightened. He had no idea then, but this fearless, stubborn boy would soon turn his entire world upside down. The next morning, Michael Reed left his Manhattan office unusually early. His personal driver was surprised but said nothing. Normally, Michael's mornings began with tightly scheduled meetings, calls with investors in Europe, and meticulously planned briefings. Today, however, there was something pulling at him, an unshakable thought that kept replaying. The boy with the box of books. Michael had never been one to indulge curiosity. Time, for him, was currency and every hour had to be accounted for. Yet he found himself instructing his driver to head not uptown, where his company headquarters gleamed against the skyline, but to the outer boroughs. Specifically, toward a school in one of the rougher neighborhoods he had once heard about in passing during a foundation report. The car slowed as it turned onto a cracked street lined with graffiti-painted walls. The sight outside contrasted sharply with the pristine, glass-covered world Michael inhabited. Children played with worn-out basketballs in small, fenced yards. A food cart on the corner struggled to keep steam rising in the morning chill. Michael adjusted his tie, as though the gesture could create a barrier between him and this unfamiliar world. He had every intention of staying in the car, merely observing from the tinted window. But something made him step out. Perhaps it was the memory of the boy's determined eyes, or maybe it was the quiet voice of his late father telling him, "Son, don't just count your money. Count your impact." The moment Michael's polished shoes hit the uneven pavement, people noticed. A tall man in a tailored suit stood out here like a diamond dropped in the sand. Parents on their way to work cast him cautious glances. Children stopped mid-laughter to stare. He made his way toward the school entrance, where a cluster of kids were dragging in their backpacks, chatting about cartoons and weekend plans. That was when he saw him again, the boy. The same boy from the subway. This time the boy wasn't carrying the box of books. Instead, he held a stack of neatly stapled worksheets in his arms, careful not to let them bend. His oversized backpack bounced against his small frame as he hurried along. Michael felt a strange nervousness tighten in his chest. He, a man who had closed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, now struggled to find words to approach a child. "Excuse me," Michael called out softly. The boy turned, blinking up at him. Recognition flashed in his eyes. "You're the man from the train?" he said, his voice cautious but steady. Michael nodded. "Yes, that was me. I never got your name." The boy shifted the papers in his arms before answering. "Tyler." "Tyler," Michael repeated as though committing it to memory. "That's a strong name." Tyler looked at him curiously. "Why are you here?" It was a fair question. Michael didn't belong here and they both knew it. He hesitated, searching for the truth instead of the polished answers he usually gave. "Because," he finally said, "I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw yesterday. You with those books. What were they for?" Tyler's face lit up, not with arrogance, but with the pure enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for someone to ask. "They're for my project. I'm trying to make a little library for the kids in my building. A lot of them don't have books at home, so I collect the ones people throw away. I clean them, tape them up if they're ripped, and then let the kids borrow them." Michael was taken aback. "You do all that, by yourself?" Tyler shrugged. "My grandma helps sometimes. But mostly me." Something in Michael stirred, a mix of admiration and shame. He remembered the countless times he had signed checks for charitable causes, feeling he had done his part. Yet here was a child, barely 12, doing more with scraps of paper and determination than Michael had ever done with his vast wealth. "You're remarkable," Michael said quietly. Tyler tilted his head. "Most people don't think so. They think I'm weird for caring about books." Michael crouched down slightly so their eyes met. "Then most people aren't seeing clearly. What you're doing is extraordinary." The boy's cheeks flushed, but before he could respond, the school bell rang. Tyler glanced toward the entrance. "I gotta go or I'll be late." Michael stood, realizing their moment was ending. "Of course. Go on." He paused, then added, "But Tyler, would you mind if I came by sometime? To see your library?" Tyler's eyes widened. No adult, certainly not one dressed like this man, had ever asked to step into his world. After a moment he nodded. "Sure. But it's not much." Michael smiled, a rare, genuine one that felt unfamiliar on his face. Sometimes not much can mean everything. As Tyler disappeared into the building, Michael remained outside, strangely grounded in a way he hadn't felt in years. The boy's words echoed in his mind, "A lot of them don't have books at home." Michael Reed, a billionaire with access to everything money could buy, suddenly realized there were still worlds he had never touched, worlds where the simplest things like a tattered book could change a child's life. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to walk away. That evening, Michael Reed sat in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. Normally this view brought him comfort, a reminder of his success, of how high he had climbed. But tonight the glittering skyline felt hollow. His mind kept replaying the image of Tyler, clutching those stapled worksheets, speaking so earnestly about his little library. Michael wasn't accustomed to feeling unsettled. In the boardroom he was decisive, unshakable. Yet here he was sipping a glass of aged scotch, feeling small. A child had managed to expose a blind spot in his life, not by accusing or demanding, but simply by existing, by caring. The next day, Michael asked his assistant to clear his afternoon schedule. "Everything?" she repeated, wide-eyed. In 10 years of working for him, she had never heard those words. "Yes, everything," he said firmly. By mid-afternoon, Michael's sleek black car pulled up to the crumbling apartment building Tyler called home. The paint was peeling and the windows bore the marks of years of weather and neglect. A few kids played hopscotch on the cracked sidewalk, their chalk lines bright against the gray concrete. Michael stepped out, instantly drawing curious stares. Dressed in a casual sweater and slacks instead of his usual suit, he still looked out of place, but at least less intimidating. He carried a simple bag. Inside it, not contracts or financial reports, but a few children's books he had impulsively picked up at a bookstore that morning. He hesitated at the entrance, unsure if he was intruding. That was when Tyler appeared, bounding down the steps, his eyes lighting up. "You came." Michael smiled despite himself. "I said I would." Tyler led him inside, through dim hallways that smelled faintly of dampness and old paint. At the end of the corridor they reached a small common room. It wasn't much, just a few worn couches, a coffee table with one leg taped up, and a shelf pushed against the wall. But on that shelf sat rows of books, some with torn covers, some taped along the spines, all carefully arranged. "This is it," Tyler said proudly. "The library." Michael stepped closer, scanning the titles. Fairy tales, adventure novels, school textbooks, each one bore the marks of second or third ownership. But they were clean, organized, and loved. "How did you get all of these?" Michael asked. "People throw books away all the time," Tyler explained. "I go around on Saturdays, check recycling bins, sometimes ask neighbors. If they're a little ripped, I fix them. And if they don't have covers, I draw new ones." Michael reached for one of the books, a battered copy of Charlotte's Web. Inside the front cover, written in careful, childlike handwriting, were the words, "Property of Tyler's library. Please return when finished." His chest tightened. The boy had created not just a collection of books, but an institution, however modest. As they talked, other kids trickled in. A little girl, no older than 7, shyly asked Tyler if she could borrow a book about princesses. Another boy returned a dictionary, apologizing for the bent corner. Tyler reassured him with the patience of someone twice his age. Michael watched in silence, humbled. Here was leadership, stripped of titles and money, a kind of leadership born from care and necessity. Tyler wasn't just handing out books. He was giving these children something to believe in, a sense of ownership, of dignity. When the room emptied again, Michael finally spoke. "Tyler, do your teachers know about this?" Tyler shrugged. "Some of them. But they don't really have time. They say it's nice, but they've got their own problems." Michael frowned. "And your parents?" For the first time, Tyler's expression dimmed. "It's just me and Grandma. My mom, she left when I was little. My dad, he's not around either. Grandma tries, but she's sick a lot." There it was. The piece Michael hadn't seen. The quiet resilience that made sense of Tyler's drive. "I see," Michael said softly, struggling to find words. "And yet you're still doing all this." Tyler looked at him, puzzled. "Why wouldn't I? Someone's gotta." The simplicity of that answer hit Michael like a hammer. In his world, decisions were debated, analyzed, projected for risk. Here, a child made choices guided by instinct and necessity. Michael knelt slightly to meet Tyler's eyes. "You're extraordinary, Tyler. Truly." The boy gave a small, uncertain smile. "I just want kids to read. Books helped me when Grandma was in the hospital. They made me feel less alone." Michael's throat tightened. He thought of his own childhood. Private tutors, shelves full of books, every resource imaginable. He had taken it all for granted. For the first time in years, Michael felt something stir deep inside him. Not guilt exactly, but a recognition. A calling. He placed the bag he had brought on the table and pulled out the books inside. "I thought your library could use a few new members." Tyler's eyes widened as he gently picked up each one. They weren't rare editions or expensive collector's items, but to him they were treasures. "These are brand new," he whispered. Michael smiled. "Every library deserves at least a few." Tyler grinned, his excitement uncontainable. "The kids are gonna love this." As Michael watched the boy hug the stack of books to his chest, he felt something shift. For years he had measured his life in profit margins and market shares. But here, in a cramped common room of a run-down building, surrounded by tattered books and the laughter of children, he saw a different kind of wealth, one that had nothing to do with money. And for the first time in decades, Michael Reed wasn't thinking about what he could gain. He was thinking about what he could give. The next morning, Michael Reed sat at the long mahogany table in his private conference room. His senior executives were gathered around, crisp suits and sharper attitudes, papers spread neatly before them. Normally this was Michael's domain, where his words carried unquestioned authority. But today he wasn't thinking about quarterly earnings or market forecasts. He was thinking about a boy with a little library, made of rescued books. He cleared his throat. "I want to discuss a new project." Heads lifted. Pens clicked. His CFO, a stern woman named Margaret, adjusted her glasses. "Is this about the acquisition in Chicago?" "No," Michael said. "It's about something different. I want to explore ways we can support children's literacy." Perhaps fund after-school reading programs, or provide resources to neighborhoods in need. The room went still. For a moment, it was as if no one knew how to respond. Finally, one executive chuckled nervously. "With respect, sir, that's philanthropy. Not business." Michael's gaze hardened. "It doesn't have to be one or the other." Margaret frowned. "Michael, our investors expect returns. They want innovation, expansion, dominance in the market. If we suddenly pivot to charity work, they'll question our focus. Wall Street doesn't reward sentiment." Another chimed in. "Besides, literacy programs? That's the government's job, or maybe nonprofits. Why should we involve ourselves?" Michael's jaw tightened. He had expected hesitation, but the blunt dismissal cut deeper than he anticipated. "Because," he said evenly, "I met a child yesterday who built a library out of nothing. Out of discarded books. He's helping more kids than most institutions do. If a 12-year-old can do that, what excuse do we have?" Silence again. The executives shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Some looked skeptical, others mildly amused. To them it sounded absurd. The billionaire titan of industry moved by a child with tape-bound paperbacks. Margaret finally broke the silence. "Michael, I respect your heart. Truly. But this isn't how things work. Investors will see this as weakness. Competitors will see it as distraction. And the media," she trailed off, shaking her head. "They'll crucify you the moment it looks like a publicity stunt." The words lingered in the air. Publicity stunt. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the gleaming skyline outside the window. He had spent his life ensuring no one could ever question his competence. Every deal, every merger, every calculated risk was designed to prove his strength. Now, even the idea of following his heart seemed like a liability. "Thank you for your input," he said curtly, dismissing the meeting. As the room emptied, he sat alone, wrestling with a storm of doubt. That evening, he confided in his oldest friend, Daniel, a retired entrepreneur who had known Michael long before the wealth and power. They sat in Daniel's modest brownstone kitchen, sipping tea instead of scotch. "You've always been the pragmatic one," Daniel said, listening patiently. "You see numbers, angles, outcomes. But this boy, he's forcing you to see something different." Michael rubbed his temples. "The board thinks I've lost my mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is nothing more than an emotional impulse." "Impulse?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Michael, you've built empires on instincts no one else believed in. The only difference now is that this instinct doesn't add zeros to your bank account, it adds meaning to your life." Michael was quiet, turning that thought over. Meaning. When was the last time he had chased that instead of profit? Still, the doubt gnawed at him. What if Margaret was right? What if the world saw this as weakness? He had spent decades crafting an image of strength. Did he dare risk it now? 2 days later, the New York Times ran a small story on page 12. "Local boy builds little library in Bronx shelter." It featured a photo of Tyler holding a stack of worn books, his smile wide and proud. Michael saw it over breakfast. He stared at the picture, at the boy whose determination had already begun to ripple beyond the walls of his shelter. Something stirred in him again. The executives might call it a distraction. Investors might call it foolish. But to Michael it looked like truth. He picked up the phone. "Margaret," he said. "Schedule a meeting with our PR and community outreach teams. I want to discuss funding children's libraries, starting with the one in the Bronx." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you certain, sir?" Michael's eyes lingered on the photograph of Tyler. The boy had nothing and yet gave everything he could. If a child could risk ridicule for a dream, why couldn't he? "I've never been more certain," he said firmly. But even as he hung up, Michael knew the hardest part wasn't convincing his executives or the public or even the investors. The hardest part would be convincing himself to let go of fear, to embrace a path not measured in dollars but in lives changed. For the first time in decades, Michael Reed stood at the edge of something unfamiliar. Not a hostile takeover. Not a billion-dollar deal. But a choice that might just cost him everything, while giving him more than he had ever known. And in the back of his mind, one voice echoed steady and clear. "Why wouldn't I? Someone's gotta." Michael Reed was not a man who did anything quietly. His whole life had been a spectacle of achievement. Front-page headlines, stock market surges, billion-dollar deals. Yet, when it came to Tyler's little library, his first steps were deliberately small, almost secretive. He started by sending a trusted aide under strict instructions. No logos, no press releases, no hints of corporate involvement. Just a few boxes of books delivered discreetly to the shelter. Inside, there were children's classics, middle-grade novels, even a handful of picture books with glossy covers. When Tyler saw the boxes, his eyes lit up. "Where did these come from?" he asked the shelter manager. She smiled. "Someone out there believes in what you're doing." Tyler ran his hands over the spines as if they were treasure. He didn't know that this someone was Michael himself, sitting in his glass tower across the city, waiting anxiously for the first report back. For weeks, Michael continued this way. More books arrived. Then small donations for better shelves. A rug for the children to sit on during story time. A second-hand laptop so Tyler could keep track of who borrowed which book. Each gift came without a name, like whispers of encouragement from an invisible ally. And each time Michael saw photographs or heard stories of how the children reacted, their laughter, their wide eyes, their careful way of cradling the books, something inside him softened. But secrecy had its limits. One Saturday afternoon, Michael decided to see the results for himself. He dressed casually again, dark jeans, a baseball cap, and drove without his usual entourage. When he entered the common room, it was alive with energy. Children sat cross-legged on the new rug, passing around books like treasures. A teenage girl read aloud from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, her voice carrying through the room. Tyler stood near the shelves, beaming, guiding kids to stories he thought they'd like. Michael stayed in the doorway for a moment, unnoticed. For a man accustomed to commanding attention, there was something strangely liberating about being invisible here, just another face in the background. Finally, Tyler spotted him. "Mr. Reed." His voice carried across the room. A few kids turned their heads, whispering, "You came back." Michael stepped forward, his heart unexpectedly tight. "I did. I wanted to see how the library was doing." Tyler's grin widened. "It's amazing. Look at all of this." He gestured proudly at the shelves, the rug, the children scattered everywhere. "It feels like a real library now." Michael's eyes softened. "That's because it is." Over the next hour, Michael sat with the children, listening as they read aloud, watching them share books with the care of librarians themselves. At one point, Amara, the little girl who had borrowed the princess book earlier, climbed into his lap without hesitation, holding out a copy of Green Eggs and Ham. "Read?" she asked shyly. Michael hesitated. He hadn't read to a child since his niece was a toddler decades ago. But he cleared his throat, opened the book, and began. His voice was stiff at first, too formal, but as Amara giggled and pointed at the silly pictures, something shifted. The billionaire titan of industry found himself laughing too, leaning into the rhythm of the rhyme. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, from children no less. Michael felt a warmth he couldn't remember ever feeling in a boardroom. That night, back in his penthouse, Michael stared at the city lights again. But this time they didn't look hollow. They looked like possibility. Still, he wrestled with questions. Could he keep doing this quietly? Should he? What if the children grew dependent, only for him to retreat later? And what if the world found out and mocked him for dabbling in charity experiments? He thought of Tyler's words again. Why wouldn't I? Someone's gotta. For the first time, Michael considered that maybe this wasn't about image or legacy. Maybe it wasn't about him at all. Maybe it was about them, the children who found magic in every page, the boy who built a library out of nothing. The next week, Michael took a bolder step. He arranged to meet Tyler after school, walking him home from the shelter. As they strolled past graffiti-covered walls and corner stores with flickering signs, Michael finally said, "Tyler, I've been helping with the books." The boy stopped, staring at him in shock. "You?" Michael nodded. "Yes. The shelves, the rug, the laptop. It was me. I wanted to see what you'd do with a little help." Tyler's eyes filled with disbelief, then gratitude. "Why would you do that?" Michael took a breath. "Because you reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. That the smallest acts can change lives." Tyler was quiet for a moment, then gave a lopsided smile. "You didn't have to do it in secret. We could have used the help out loud too." Michael chuckled softly. "Maybe I wasn't ready to admit I cared." They continued walking in silence, the city humming around them. For once, Michael Reed, the man who built empires, wasn't leading the way. He was following the steps of a boy who believed in books, in hope, in something bigger than himself. And for the first time in years, it felt like the right path. For a few precious weeks, Michael Reed lived in a strange duality. By day he was still the sharp-suited billionaire, his name tied to mergers, acquisitions, and financial forecasts. But in the evenings and on weekends, he slipped into the shelter's common room like a man returning to a secret second life. He read stories to children, sorted donated books, and sometimes just sat quietly, watching the joy ripple through a place that had once been defined by silence and scarcity. It couldn't last. One Friday afternoon, as Michael was crouched beside a stack of paperbacks helping Amara sound out tricky words, the flashbulb of a camera pierced the moment. He froze. The children startled. Tyler spun around, eyes wide. A reporter stood in the doorway, notebook in hand, photographer at his side. "Mr. Reed," she called, her voice echoing across the room, "care to comment on your new project?" The room erupted into murmurs. Michael straightened slowly, the familiar steel mask sliding back onto his face. "I don't believe this is the place for an interview," he said coolly, guiding Amara gently to her seat. But the damage was done. Within hours, the story hit the evening news. Billionaire Michael Reed spotted at city shelter, launching secret philanthropy? The reaction was immediate and polarized. Talk show hosts debated his motives. Some praised him. Finally, a titan using his fortune for good. Others sneered, a PR stunt to polish his tarnished reputation. Editorial headlines swung wildly. "Reed finds his conscience," one read. Another declared, "Books won't buy redemption." Michael's phone lit up endlessly. His board of directors demanded answers. "Are you starting a foundation we don't know about?" One member snapped over the phone. "Investors hate surprises." His PR team begged him to make a statement, to control the narrative. They suggested glossy press releases, staged photo ops, maybe even a documentary series. Michael ignored them all. He sat in his office, staring at the news ticker running across the bottom of his muted television, feeling like a man standing in a storm with no umbrella. At the shelter, the ripple effects were immediate too. Donations surged. Strangers showed up at the door, arms full of books, boxes of supplies. Some came with cameras, hoping to snap their own photo of the billionaire among the poor. Tyler watched it all unfold with a mix of excitement and dread. On the one hand, the library was flourishing beyond anything he'd imagined. On the other, the simplicity of their project was vanishing under the weight of scrutiny. When Michael returned the following weekend, the boy pulled him aside. "Did you know this would happen?" Tyler asked, eyes narrowed. Michael shook his head. "No. I wanted to keep it quiet. But once the media smells something, they don't let go." Tyler crossed his arms. "They're saying you're only doing this for attention." Michael exhaled heavily. "They've said worse. The truth is, Tyler, people will always question motives. The only thing that matters is the impact. Are the kids reading? Are they smiling?" Tyler hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, they are." "Then let them talk," Michael said softly. Yet the scrutiny did more than generate noise. It attracted skeptics to the shelter itself. One afternoon, as children flipped through books, a sharply dressed man arrived with a clipboard. "Health and safety inspection," he announced brusquely. "With all this new attention, we have to ensure regulations are being met." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. Inspections were rare, and the timing felt suspiciously political. Michael happened to be there that day. He approached calmly, towering over the inspector. "Everything here is in order," Michael said firmly. "But if you'd like improvements, consider them done. At my expense." The inspector blinked, taken aback by the weight of Reed's presence. Very well. I'll file the report." When he left, Tyler muttered, "They're trying to shut us down." Michael placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we'll fight harder." Still, doubt gnawed at him. That night, lying awake in his penthouse, Michael scrolled through online commentary. Words like fraud, manipulator, opportunist jumped off the screen. He closed his eyes, remembering Amara's small hand clutching his, the sound of her laughter as he stumbled through green eggs and ham. For the first time in his life, he realized, public opinion didn't matter. For decades, he had measured his worth in numbers, in headlines, in how loudly the world applauded. Now the only applause he cared about came from children clutching books. But the storm wasn't over. One morning, as Michael sipped his coffee overlooking the skyline, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his head of security. "Mr. Reed, we've identified organized protests forming outside the shelter. Some groups claim your involvement is a cover-up for shady business practices. Others are demanding you fund citywide reforms instead of token projects." Michael's stomach tightened. The shelter had been a refuge. Now it risked becoming a battlefield. He thought of Tyler, of the kids who had just begun to believe in something bigger. The last thing he wanted was for them to feel unsafe again. For the first time, Michael considered stepping fully into the light, not just as a shadow donor, not as a photo op, but as a man willing to defend what had grown from a boy's simple dream. He set his coffee down, jaw tightening with resolve. If the world wanted a spectacle, they'd get one. But this time it wouldn't be about him. It would be about them. The children. The library. The future. The morning of the gala dawned with an odd mixture of excitement and unease. Marcus woke early not because of nerves, but because of a vivid dream in which his late mother stood by his bed and whispered, "Remember, kindness is the only legacy that lasts." He carried those words with him as he dressed in a tailored navy suit, his usual armor of confidence. The city buzzed with chatter about the evening's event. Social media was ablaze with hashtags. Hashtag Beacon of Hope, hashtag Marcus Hale Gala, hashtag From Streets to Stars. Yet Marcus's mind was not on the glittering spectacle but on the children it was meant to help. He remembered their faces, Sophia's wary smile, Jamal's nervous excitement, Lily's quiet resilience. The gala was not just about raising money, it was about proving to the world that children like them deserved a future brighter than the shadows they were born into. By late afternoon, the grand hall of the Westin Hotel had been transformed into a dreamscape. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above white silk drapes, and the stage was adorned with golden lettering, a future for every child. Staff hurried about setting tables, aligning centerpieces of lilies and roses. Reporters began to gather outside, their cameras ready to capture every flash of glamour and drama. Marcus arrived with Jamal, Sophia, and Lily. Each child was dressed in clothes carefully chosen for them. Nothing flashy, just elegant enough to help them feel like they belonged. Jamal wore a crisp black suit, his tie slightly crooked until Marcus bent down and fixed it. Sophia, in a lavender dress, held her head high despite her trembling hands. Lily clutched a tiny purse and looked around in wide-eyed wonder. "Remember," Marcus whispered to them as they stepped inside, "tonight isn't about how rich people look. It's about showing the world that you matter." As the crowd swelled, Marcus mingled with donors, shaking hands and offering practiced smiles. But under the surface tension brewed. He noticed Councilman Rourke in the corner, his lips pressed into a thin line, whispering to two men in dark suits. The same developer who had pushed for demolishing the children's shelter was here, and his presence was no coincidence. Marcus felt a chill creep down his spine. The evening began with light music and laughter. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne. The host, a well-known TV anchor, took the stage to introduce the purpose of the gala. "Tonight," she declared, "we stand together to rewrite the stories of children who were told they had no future. We stand with Marcus Hale." Applause thundered through the room. Then came the speeches. Donors spoke of philanthropy, of responsibility, of hope. But when Marcus walked onto the stage, the room hushed in anticipation. He began softly, his voice steady, eyes scanning the sea of faces. "Some of you know me as a billionaire. Others know me from the headlines. But tonight, I want you to see me as what I truly am, a boy who once had nothing." He told his story, not in the polished way he usually recited to the press, but raw and unfiltered. He spoke of sleeping under bridges, of stealing food out of desperation, of the teacher who once slipped him an apple and said, "You deserve to eat too." His words painted vivid images, pulling at the hearts of even the most stoic faces in the audience. "I stand here," Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion, "not because I was smarter, luckier, or stronger than the children out there tonight. I stand here because once someone believed in me. And now it is my duty, our duty, to believe in them." The applause was deafening. Sophia wiped tears from her cheeks. Jamal stared at Marcus as though seeing him in a new light. Lily clutched Marcus's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. But the storm was coming. As Marcus stepped off the stage, Councilman Rourke moved forward with a smirk. He whispered to a journalist, and within moments, a rumor began circulating around the room. Marcus's new shelter was illegal. His foundation was misusing funds. The word spread like wildfire, muttered from table to table, poisoning the air of hope with suspicion. Marcus felt the shift before he heard the whispers. The eyes that once glowed with admiration now flickered with doubt. Donors leaned toward each other, murmuring. A woman in pearls frowned at him as though reconsidering her pledge. Sophia noticed it too. "Mr. Hale," she whispered urgently, "they're saying bad things about you." Marcus clenched his jaw, fury rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had prepared for opposition, but he hadn't expected the attack to be so public, so ruthless. This was not just about undermining him, it was about crushing the very hope the children had begun to feel. He stood tall, walked back to the microphone and addressed the crowd again, his voice firm and unshaken. "Some of you may have heard rumors tonight," he said, his gaze steady. I won't waste this moment defending myself. Instead, I'll let the children speak. Because their truth is stronger than any lie. He stepped aside and gently nudged Jamal forward. The boy's eyes widened in shock, but Marcus squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. The spotlight shifted. The hall held its breath. Jamal took a shaky step toward the microphone. For the first time, his voice would carry farther than the streets he once called home. And in that fragile moment, as fear clashed with courage, the true test of Marcus's mission began. Jamal stood frozen, staring at the microphone as though it were a giant about to swallow him whole. The ballroom felt impossibly large, its walls closing in, its chandeliers burning down on him like relentless suns. He had rehearsed nothing. He had never spoken to a crowd this size, not even close. His throat was dry, his palms sweaty. For a fleeting second, he considered running back to his seat. Then he looked at Marcus. The man who had believed in him, who had steadied his hands when fear threatened to take over, was standing just a step behind, his eyes calm but firm. Marcus gave a tiny nod, the kind of nod that said, "You can do this. I believe in you." Jamal took a deep breath. "My name is Jamal," he began, his voice cracking under the weight of silence. A ripple of soft chuckles moved through the audience, but then he steadied himself. I didn't think I'd ever be standing in a place like this. Most of my life, I thought no one wanted to hear what I had to say. The room grew quiet. I used to sleep in cars, on benches, wherever I could. People looked away when they saw me, like I was invisible. Some nights I thought I really was. He paused, his chest rising and falling as though each word weighed a ton. But then I met Mr. Hale. And for the first time, someone didn't look away. He saw me. He told me I mattered. A collective stillness spread across the crowd. Forks stilled midair, champagne glasses lowered. The donors who had whispered doubts a few minutes ago now leaned forward, captivated. Jamal continued, stronger now. "You don't know what it feels like to be a kid and think your life doesn't count. To think you'll never be more than what the streets make you. But I'm telling you tonight, it only takes one person to change that. Mr. Hale was that person for me. And now, because of him, I believe I can be that person for someone else one day." His words struck deeper than any polished speech could have. Tears shimmered in the eyes of strangers who had arrived tonight in glittering gowns and tuxedos. Jamal stepped back, his chest heaving as the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Then Sophia rose. Without waiting for an invitation, she walked toward the stage, her lavender dress catching the light. She adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling. "I'm Sophia," she said, her voice soft but steady. "People always told me I was too broken. That a girl like me would never make it out of foster care, never belong anywhere. I believed them, until Mr. Hale told me I could write my own story." She glanced at Marcus, who gave her the same reassuring nod. "For the first time in my life I feel like I matter. Like my voice has a place in this world. And tonight I want you to know, when you help kids like me, you're not just giving us food or clothes. You're giving us hope. You're giving us back our future." Her words cracked halfway through, but that rawness only deepened the impact. The audience was silent, transfixed. Many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Finally, Lily, the youngest of the three, hesitated at her seat. Marcus bent down and whispered, "Only if you want to, Lily." She nodded, clutching her tiny purse. She stepped onto the stage, her small frame dwarfed by the podium. Her voice was barely above a whisper at first. "I'm Lily. I used to hide when people came near me because bad things happen when I was seen." She fidgeted with the hem of her dress. "But Mr. Hale told me I didn't have to hide anymore. That I deserved to be safe. That I deserved to smile." The room broke. Tears rolled freely, hands covered mouths, hearts cracked open. Lily looked around as though surprised by the power of her own words, then whispered, "I just want other kids to know, they don't have to be afraid forever." Silence blanketed the room for a heartbeat, and then the audience surged to their feet in a standing ovation. The sound was deafening, echoing off the chandeliers, filling every corner of the hall with something unshakable, faith. Marcus stepped forward, standing beside the three children. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of both pain and triumph. "These are not statistics. They are not charity cases. They are the future. Every dollar you pledge tonight is not a donation. It is an investment in lives that will change this world. You've heard their voices. You felt their truth. Now I ask you, stand with them." For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Then one donor rose and announced, "I'll pledge $1 million. Applause erupted. Another stood, promising $500,000. Then another and another. Hands shot up across the room, numbers called out, commitments made. The air was electric, charged with an unstoppable momentum. Even the journalists who had come looking for scandal found themselves scribbling headlines of inspiration instead. The rumors Councilman Rourke had tried to spread were drowned out, smothered by the raw power of truth. As the pledges climbed higher, Marcus glanced at Rourke. The councilman's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, furious scowl. For once he was powerless. The night that had begun with doubt ended with roaring belief. And at the center of it all stood three children who had once been invisible, now seen, now heard, now unbreakable. The gala had ended in triumph. Marcus stood in the glow of the pledges, tens of millions raised in a single evening. The donors had cheered, the children had found their voices, and the world seemed to have tilted toward hope. Cameras captured every shining smile, every emotional embrace, every champagne toast celebrating a cause that had finally pierced the public's heart. But Marcus knew better. Victories like these, especially ones so public, never came without consequences. Later that night, while the last guests drifted out and the hall staff cleared half-empty glasses and wilting roses, Marcus stood by the balcony overlooking the city. Sophia, Jamal, and Lily had already been taken home by a trusted guardian, their eyes still glowing with the kind of belief Marcus feared could too easily be broken. He pulled his phone from his pocket and sure enough, the first storm clouds had already begun to gather. A headline on one outlet read, "From Streets to Savior, Marcus Hale raises millions for homeless youth." But another screamed, "Is Hale's charity a front?" Rumors of misused funds surface amid gala. Councilman Rourke hadn't wasted a second. He had fed the journalists just enough poison to turn triumph into suspicion. Marcus sighed. He had known this was coming, but the timing was brutal. The children had bared their souls tonight. They couldn't afford to see hope crushed under the weight of politics and greed. The following morning the war began. News stations ran split-screen debates, some praising Marcus as a visionary, others condemning him as a manipulator seeking to whitewash his own past with philanthropy. Social media was ablaze. The hashtags of hope from the night before now competed with hashtag Hale Scandal and hashtag Charity Fraud. In his office, Marcus's assistant, Evelyn, stormed in holding a stack of printed articles. "They're hitting us hard," she said, slamming the papers down on his desk. Rourke filed a formal complaint with the city. "He's accusing your foundation of funneling money to shell companies." "That's ridiculous," Marcus replied calmly, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Every dollar is accounted for." "That doesn't matter," Evelyn said. "Perception is reality. And right now the perception is ugly." Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had faced hostile boardrooms, billion-dollar lawsuits, even personal betrayals. But this felt different. This wasn't just about him, it was about the children. If people lost faith in the foundation, everything they'd worked for could collapse overnight. That evening, Marcus attended a small press conference to address the allegations head-on. He stood before flashing cameras and skeptical reporters, his voice steady. "My life has never been without controversy," he began. "I'm no stranger to doubt. But I will tell you this, every cent raised for the Beacon Foundation has gone, and will continue to go, directly to programs that support children. We keep open books. We welcome audits. Transparency is not a burden for us, it is our standard." Questions flew at him like daggers. "Why was Councilman Rourke excluded from your advisory board? Is it true you're planning to build on land earmarked for commercial development? Are you using these children as props to boost your image?" Marcus answered each calmly, refusing to let anger flare. "If you think my image matters more to me than the lives of children," he said finally, his tone sharp with conviction, "then you don't know me at all." Despite his efforts, doubt lingered in the air. Rourke appeared on a rival news station that same night, smirking into the camera. "Look, I respect philanthropy," he said smoothly, "but when billionaires start playing savior you have to ask, what's in it for them? Hale wants to expand his foundation onto prime city land. That's not charity, that's empire building." The narrative spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Marcus met with Sophia, Jamal, and Lily at the shelter. Their faces were pale, their eyes uncertain. Sophia clutched a newspaper with the headline, "Is Marcus Hale a fraud?" "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are they going to shut everything down?" Marcus crouched in front of her, his voice low but unshakable. "Listen to me. None of this changes what we're doing. You heard the people cheer for you. You saw the pledges. That is real. What Rourke is doing is just noise. And I promise you, noise cannot break truth." Jamal clenched his fists. "I hate him. That councilman. He doesn't care about us. He just wants to see you fall. Marcus placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Hating him gives him power. What we do instead is show the world he's wrong. But privately, Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Rourke had resources, connections, and the ruthless willingness to exploit public fear. And Marcus had something far more fragile: hope, embodied in 3 children who couldn't afford to lose again. That night, as Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him, he poured himself a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. Instead, he stared out into the darkness, hearing again his mother's words from the dream. Kindness is the only legacy that lasts. He whispered aloud to the empty room, then I'll fight for it. Even if it destroys me. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, Councilman Rourke made a call. His voice was sharp, cold. It's time. Dig deeper. Find anything we can use against him. I don't care if it's old, buried, or personal. Hail is going down. The storm had broken. And Marcus knew that before the light could return, the darkness would try its hardest to consume everything he had built. The media storm showed no sign of slowing. Each morning, Marcus woke to fresh headlines, each more vicious than the last. The billionaire's double life. Uncovering Hale's hidden past. From boardrooms to back alleys, who is the real Marcus Hale? It wasn't just the foundation under attack anymore, it was him. His past, the one he had carefully buried, was clawing its way back into the light. The first blow came in the form of an investigative piece on national television. The reporter's voice was somber as grainy photographs flashed across the screen. A younger Marcus, lean and angry, standing outside a rundown bar in Detroit. A police booking photo from decades earlier, his eyes hollow, his jaw clenched. Before he became a tech mogul, Marcus Hale was arrested twice in his 20s. Once for disorderly conduct, another time for assault in a bar fight, the anchor announced. Though charges were dropped, questions remain. Can a man with such a history be trusted with the city's most vulnerable children? The clip spread like wildfire. Social media filled with outrage. #FraudHale trended. Rourke smirked in interviews, shaking his head with mock sympathy. Look, I'm not saying people can't change, he said, but when someone hides a violent past, you have to ask yourself, what else are they hiding? Marcus watched the segment alone, jaw tightening as the ghosts of those nights returned. He remembered the cold cell, the metallic taste of regret in his mouth, the shame that had burned into him. He had been a different man then, angry, reckless, searching for meaning in fists and whiskey. Now, decades later, it threatened to undo everything. That evening, Evelyn stormed into his office, eyes blazing. They're framing you like a criminal. You have to fight back harder. Release statements. Sue for defamation. We can bury this. Marcus shook his head. If I fight it that way, it'll only make me look guilty. People will say I'm trying to silence the truth. Then what do we do? Evelyn demanded. Sit here and let Rourke destroy everything? Marcus didn't answer. His mind was already elsewhere. Later that night he drove alone to the shelter. The city lights blurred past his windshield, his thoughts a storm of doubt and resolve. When he arrived, he found Sophia sitting on the steps, hugging her knees, her phone glowing in her hands. She looked up at him, eyes wide and uncertain. Is it true? She whispered. Were you arrested? Marcus sat beside her, the weight of the question heavy. For a moment he wanted to lie to protect her from the ugliness. But then he remembered the promise he had made, not just to her but to himself, honesty above all. Yes, he said quietly. It's true. A long time ago I made mistakes. Big ones. I hurt people. I hurt myself. But I changed. I fought to become better. And that's why I built this foundation, so no one else has to make the same mistakes I did. Sophia studied him, her eyes searching. So, you're not perfect. Marcus let out a dry laugh. Far from it. But perfection doesn't change the world. People do. Broken, imperfect people who refuse to stay broken. Her shoulders relaxed. She leaned against him, resting her head lightly on his arm. Then I don't care what they say. You're the only one who ever saw me, really saw me. That's what matters. Her words cut through the fog of doubt like sunlight. The next day Marcus made a decision. He called a press conference, this time not in a grand hall, but on the steps of the shelter itself. Behind him stood Sophia, Jamal, Lily, and dozens of other children the foundation had helped. The cameras clicked furiously as he stepped forward. I know you've all seen the stories, Marcus began, his voice firm but calm. Yes, when I was younger I was arrested. Twice. I was angry, lost, reckless. I made mistakes I wish I hadn't. But those mistakes do not define who I am today. What defines me is what I've chosen to do since. I built businesses, yes, but more importantly, I built this. He gestured to the children behind him. A foundation for those who need hope the most. His voice grew stronger, more impassioned. Councilman Rourke and others want you to believe that my past disqualifies me from serving these kids. I say it's the very reason I can. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel worthless. And I know how dangerous it is when no one believes in you. That ends here. The crowd murmured. Reporters scribbled. The children stood tall behind him, their presence louder than any smear campaign. One reporter shouted, "Are you admitting guilt?" "I'm admitting humanity," Marcus replied. "And if that disqualifies me, so be it. But I will never stop fighting for these children." The footage aired across the nation that evening. Some called it a desperate move. Others called it courageous. But one thing was clear. Marcus had shifted the narrative. He wasn't hiding anymore. Yet, as he returned home that night, exhaustion weighing on him, a note slipped under his penthouse door sent a chill through his veins. In sharp, scrawled handwriting it read, "You think you can save them. You can't even save yourself. Walk away, or next time, it won't just be headlines." Marcus held the note, the paper trembling in his fingers. He realized the fight had moved beyond politics. Rourke wasn't just waging a smear campaign anymore. Someone wanted to scare him into silence. And maybe worse. The night air outside the hospital carried a coolness that hinted at early spring, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt that he could breathe without the invisible weight pressing down on his chest. The city lights glittered around him as though celebrating not just Noah's recovery, but the countless quiet acts of kindness that had carried them both to this point. Inside the hospital, Noah was sitting up in bed, coloring in a sketchbook that had become his constant companion. His cheeks glowed with a healthier hue, his hair, though thinner than before, was starting to grow back. Every stroke of his crayon was steady, confident. The fear that had once clouded his young eyes was gone, replaced with the same spark Ethan had fallen in love with from the moment he held him as a newborn. And beside him, perched on the edge of the hospital bed, was Alexander Carter. Billionaire. Business mogul. Yet in that small, sterile room he was neither of those things. He was just Mr. Alex, the man who told funny stories, who listened without judgment, and who had become something Ethan never expected, a friend. "Look, Mr. Alex," Noah said proudly, holding up the picture he had been working on. It was a drawing of a big house surrounded by trees with stick figures standing in front of it, Ethan, Noah, and a taller figure with spiky hair that could only be Alex. Alex chuckled, his eyes softening. "Is that supposed to be me?" "Yeah," Noah said with a grin. "That's our house. You said once you liked trees, so I drew a lot of them. And look, you're smiling." Alex leaned closer, studying the picture. "That's the best smile I've ever had." Ethan watched the exchange, his chest tightening in ways he couldn't explain. Gratitude, yes. Relief, of course. But there was something deeper too, an awe at the way Alex had walked into their lives and transformed them without asking for anything in return. For weeks, Ethan had wrestled with the question of why Alex had done all this. Was it guilt? Was it loneliness? Or had it simply been generosity? Tonight he finally understood. Alex wasn't just helping them. He was healing something in himself. The following month brought change none of them could have predicted. After Noah was discharged, Alex didn't fade into the background like Ethan half expected. Instead, he became even more present. He invited Ethan and Noah to visit his estate on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a sanctuary. Acres of green fields, gardens bursting with flowers, and a lake that mirrored the sky. When Noah first stepped onto the property, his laughter rang out like bells. "It's like a castle," he exclaimed, running across the manicured lawn with a freedom Ethan hadn't seen in him since before the illness. Ethan followed more slowly, overwhelmed. He had grown up with nothing, fought for every scrap, every dime, every moment of stability. Walking through Alex's world felt like stepping into a fairy tale. But Alex never made it feel intimidating. Instead, he stripped away the grandeur with simple acts. Walking barefoot across the grass with Noah, cooking dinner himself instead of letting the chef handle it, sitting on the porch at night telling stories from his past. Ethan began to see sides of Alex that the world never would. Vulnerable sides. Regretful sides. Alex spoke of missed opportunities, of family ties broken by greed and ambition, of friends lost because he'd once believed money was enough to fill the void inside him. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Alex admitted one night as they sat by the fire pit, Noah asleep on a blanket nearby. "Before I met you two, my life was quiet. Too quiet. I thought success was measured by how much you could accumulate. But watching you fight for Noah, it reminded me what real wealth looks like. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, his throat too tight for words. By summer, the three of them had settled into a rhythm that felt less like chance and more like destiny. Noah grew stronger each day, his energy returning in bursts that sometimes left Ethan exhausted but grateful beyond words. Alex continued to weave himself into their lives, not with grand gestures but with constancy. He came to Noah's doctor appointments, celebrated every milestone, and sat through every late-night scare when Ethan's mind ran away with worry. He became family, though none of them dared to label it out loud. One afternoon, Noah asked the question that had been hanging in the air for months. "Mr. Alex, are you gonna stay with us forever?" Ethan's heart skipped, unsure of how Alex would respond. Alex smiled gently, ruffling Noah's hair. "As long as you'll have me, kiddo." The boy grinned, satisfied, before darting off to chase butterflies. Ethan caught Alex's gaze, and in that moment, no words were needed. The answer was already there. The story that began with despair had turned into one of hope. Not because of money, not because of miracles, but because two strangers decided to show up for each other when it mattered most. And as the seasons turned, the once fractured lives of Ethan and Noah began to knit together with Alex's in ways that none of them could have foreseen. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to dream, not just of survival but of a future. A future where his son's laughter was constant, where love was abundant, and where family didn't have to mean blood. It was, in every way that mattered, a new beginning.